set, secure. Automation and orchestration, endpoint detection and response, network visibility, cloud, containers, DevSecOps, threat intelligence, security platforms. Wondering how to keep up with all the latest security products and trends while still keeping your organization safe? Then stick around to listen to Ready, Set, Secure, the Set Solutions Podcast.
And hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 44 of the Ready, Set, Secure Set Solutions Podcast, live stream, whatever. All the things. Appreciate you joining us. As usual, my name is Michael Farnham, CTO with Set Solutions, and as usual, joining us. Well, not as usual. He's been on quite a few times, but now it's as usual. Greg Porterfield is our new official podcast co-host. How you doing, Greg?
I am good. Happy to be here.
Glad you are. I know you had to be remote again today, but hopefully you'll be in here soon and joining us in studio. But thank you very much for coming on a bunch of times and now officially co-host. Appreciate that.
It's going to be fun.
Yes, it is. It is. It will be fun. Also, now joining us, special guest star, Leo Magallon, Senior Security Consultant here at Set Solutions. How you doing, Leo?
Good to be here. I'm doing good.
Good. Thanks for coming in. We're going to be talking about identity in the cloud today. Identity in general, kind of a history lesson in identity in the cloud. So Leo is one of our experts in that space. So appreciate you joining us. So as usual, we will be doing the Set Solutions segment here real quick. So let's get that started. First of all, talking about Leo, his cloud blog is coming out very soon. So be on the lookout for that here in the next few weeks. He'll have that coming out on, it's at our setsolutions.com/blog link. You can go out there and read that. Be on the lookout for that coming out. We've also got a golf event coming up May 20th up in Dallas. So we've got a few spots left. If you are interested in going to that, please reach out to your Set Solutions salesperson, account executive, whatever you want to call them. They can get you an invite. Up in Oklahoma City, we've got a movie night on May 26th. I will be up there for Top Gun Maverick. It feels really weird to have another Top Gun movie since that was, 1990 or 91 or something like that. I can't remember. Maybe 80s? I can't remember.
It's been a while. Feels
80s,
like 80s,
right? Yeah. So it'll be interesting. A bunch of unrealistic flight stuff, but it should be fun anyway. Action stuff.
Exciting.
Exactly. And then, if you can believe it, we've got some on in person up in San Francisco, RSA. We're going to be at RSA. Quite a few of us will be there. If you are a customer and you are going there, or a vendor partner of ours and you're going there and you want to meet us in our suite, let us know. We'll be up there most of that week. And then Splunk.conf the next week, we'll have some representation there. We got a couple of people speaking there. Very excited about that. So that's all the updates on Set Solutions. Now on to the news segment. So we're making kind of a move to where we're only doing two articles, and Greg has provided one and Leo has provided one. Greg is going to be talking about what we think is a new APT doing some weird stuff on email, some kind of staying very persistent via email. It was really interesting, some of the stuff that's going on there. And Leo is going to be talking about, well, what else? Identity management, but in relation to zero trust and getting some of that knocked out before you try to go full zero trust, which makes sense to me. So those are the two articles. Greg, why don't you introduce your article? Tell us what you thought, what was interesting about it, and we'll discuss.
So this article is from Mandiant. It dropped last week, and it's tracking a kind of an uncategorized group. So it doesn't have the APT or any of the fun, cute names that we give to things, but starting to kind of get some attention. This is an espionage threat actor, and the kind of overall goal is targeting executives or people involved in mergers and acquisitions within an organization to kind of steal that information or steal their emails. It's pretty targeted to not only the kind of exchange, but cloud. They are very persistent. They can be kicked out of the environment and they will come back. They use cameras or NAS devices that are hard to secure because we can't just put agents on them, or kind of our traditional approach to security. They use these as exfiltration points to kind of set up reverse shells and send that data out and kind of get around things. It also blends into their environment. There's advanced kind of paying attention to what's going on and blending into the environment. And that was, it caught my attention.
That's the reason I thought it was interesting, was kind of one of those last bullet points you brought up, which was we don't have a traditional way of putting some type of antivirus / EDR agent on those boxes, those IoT boxes, those whatever that may be. And since we're not typically putting any kind of endpoint on there, the only other way really to detect those is some type of network traffic analysis. So like a network detection and response. I'm sure they're talking about reverse shells, using SSH. So that's going to be encrypted. So you're going to have to do some kind of metadata analysis to make, or some kind of reputational analysis of knowing, or just, maybe paying attention to what's the traffic on your firewalls, or maybe, heaven forbid, actually having egress filtering going out. So you don't have a bunch of SSH, or you would notice, hey, why in the world do I have a bunch of SSH going out of my network? Where is this originating from? I mean, there are things you can do that should be typical security things that you put in place, any kind of remediation that you put in place, or some kind of visibility that you put in place. But obviously they know that most companies don't, or a lot of companies anyway, don't do that kind of basic, blocking and tackling from an egress perspective. So it's an effective way of going about it.
It is.
Yeah. You got any thoughts on that, Leo?
Yeah, I mean, if we think about that, I was actually speaking with Greg about this before the podcast, where it takes me back to the late 2000s, early to 2010s. This is still happening, but it's just hackers are getting, they're looking for software loopholes, and they're looking for advantages that they can take on devices that may not have the capability, or it's a device that's not managed, as you previously stated. Yeah.
No, it's, take advantage of whatever they can. But again, I think it's I've actually gone all day today without hearing Log4j, but I'm going to say it. That was one of the things in there that if you would have been doing basic egress filtering, you could have stopped a lot of that attack. There were the things in place that you can do to not let them take advantage. It doesn't have to be a full-blown network detection and response implementation in your environment to stop some of this. You can put something in place that says, I am not going to let SSH go out of my environment except in very specific instances and control it. That's possible with today's technology. You don't have to have anything fancy in place. So anyway, sorry, I'm sitting up on a soapbox. I'll get down. Any closing points, Greg, on that?
I think that there are protections, and there are the article talks about kind of indicators of compromise and what we're looking for to inspect an environment. I think on top of things like egress filtering, you also have your kind of known good states, knowing what your environment looks like. So when something changes, like an attack like this, it's subtle. It's not raising a bunch of flags. It's going to be something small. So knowing what your environment looks like, knowing how to go back and snapshot, these are the processes that were running on these devices. These are the processes that are running now. And in this case, it's a random cron that shouldn't be running. Well, when did it show up? There's a lot of ways to go after this particular type of vulnerability or this type of attack, and we will get better at it.
Yep. Well, way to stay positive. I was all negative about it, but you're being positive, so I appreciate it. All right. Well, thanks, Greg. Appreciate that article. Leo, why don't you introduce yours? Tell us what you liked about it, and then we'll dig in.
Yeah, so the article I'm talking about today, it deals with uh, achieving the goal of zero trust. Like, what is zero trust? You want to go passwordless. You want to have a posture. You want to identify your devices and allow users to use them. So for that, there are a number of things you can implement, which are biometrics. But to reset biometrics, you need a more mature environment. Then it's not as easy to reset a biometric as resetting a password. So that's one of the things that enterprises have to take into account. But in order to achieve that, they need to first have an identity and access management program in place, which means now you're going to identify all your applications. You're going to have them and try to achieve a way for your people to use a single identity to access multiple applications. So as we saw in the late 2010s, business departments started acquiring applications, and so now employees had to manage a number of identities and passwords. And as we have seen in the past, users tend to continue to use the same password or maybe a little variation of that password, which is easily hackable because you just have to guess it now. And Greg knows this very well because that's his line. That's up his line of work. And so achieving an identity and access management program sets up the enterprise for success. So now you have a process by which you can bring in an identity from HR all the way into all the applications by consolidating all the apps and making sure that you only need that one authentication piece, be it through zero trust or as most enterprises are today using MFA and a password, and perhaps that SMS message that most of us get from your bank account, right? So achieving that identity and access management program is a cornerstone of being able to then go to zero trust. And this applies to any identity that you're using and applications that you're using either on premise or in the cloud. Most of the applications are going cloud, of course, right? As well as our servers and
whole infrastructure in general is starting to make that move.
Network is going cloud too. So now you're talking about a perimeter, which is someone somewhere.
Yeah.
And with that identity.
Well, I have a sneaking suspicion that you're stealing some of your own thunder in the main segment because we're probably going to be talking some of that stuff.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, we had CyberArk in here today. I mean, there's some of their mantra is that identity is the new perimeter, right? That's the basis, and it even says it in this article. I mean, the basis of having zero trust in place at all is to have a good identity and access management structure. And like you talked about, being just not IAM, right? It's IGA, I guess, identity governance all the way down, connecting to those HR systems and being able to create you an identity at that spot all the way through and being able to govern it throughout the time you're in that organization, making sure you don't get scope creep or whatever that's called.
And when you do IGA, you have to know and be able to revise your rules for creating and provisioning those identities, or deprovisioning them too, because someone might get in there and they might learn the process, and if it's changed and you don't revise that, then you may be prone to be hacked.
Greg, any thoughts here? I'm sure you got a million, being like Leo said.
I think the concept of multiple identities, like having the lots of accounts spread out all over the place. This is the account we use over here. This is the one we use over here. Getting those down to as few as possible is always good. Multi-factor is something that is the bane of my existence most of the time. So it's a very good thing to have. The more easy we can make this for people to adopt and use without getting in the way of their job, the better off we're going to be. We still have kind of work to do, but it is a pillar. It's one of those things that, if we find a list of accounts, or if we're scrubbing around and figuring things out, definitely looking for those old accounts that have been over provisioned, that have too much access, that they were given too many permissions along the way, and how can we leverage that to something else, at least from the attacker standpoint. So good programs around kind of following those identities through and making sure that people have access to what they need and only what they need, so that if something goes wrong, it's not as catastrophic as it might be.
Yeah. Well, it's a great article. It's very much in line, like I said, with what we're going to be talking about. So I think with what Greg said, let's go ahead and use that to segue into the main segment, because we're going to be covering some of this stuff. I know it's not focused on zero trust, what we're talking about. We're talking about identity in the cloud, but part of what we wanted to talk about in the main segment was kind of where we came from, which was the, kind of the history of identity. We're all, well, I don't know if Greg's as old as you and I are, but we've been around. I saw it back in the day when I was running Novell Networks, which I still maintain was one of the best directory structures ever. Was way better than Microsoft's NT back then. Then NT 4.0 came out and all the Active Directory came out and they started catching up. But I saw it back then, and you still had the same problems back then with having identities all over the place. And that was even before you had distributed applications. So why don't we start kind of talking about, from your perspective, the history of kind of where we were with identity, and then let's kind of move into the progression of where we are now, maybe, and then where we're going.
Okay. So I think we're starting where identities and technologies actually matured for the better. I'd say I would go to the 2000s, not before. I think in the 2000s, we had an internal directory structure with most of our apps on premise, and everybody had to go to work. Then the VPNs came in, and then you could work outside, although it was a split tunnel, which means that they could go to the internet and could go to work or access all the resources they needed. And but that also presented it was a point of that could harm the computer if it wasn't updated, if the AV wasn't updated, And so we have migrated from that to what I said in the 2010s, which is departments acquiring and getting applications to ease up the activities that the departments wanted to achieve. HR, we have Salesforce, we have all these applications now in the cloud. And so in the 2010s, people had many identities they had to manage. And that's just how it went. Now, as of late, the 2010s into this now 2020s, we have now migrated to still a lot of applications, but more cloud than anything. We're actually migrating things from on-premise to the cloud. And so for those enterprises that have not been able to synchronize or actually, collapse all those identities into the one they manage, it is a challenge for them to protect those identities, as Greg said. And so that's where we are now.
Yeah, okay.
So in the 2020s now, what I've seen enterprises do is they're trying to actually manage the identities, collapsing all those identities into one, incrementing now with compliance, the ISO 27001, the NIST, even that CSF, NIST CSF is actually presenting guidelines to enterprises to actually follow proper password complexity rules, or changing a password every so often. So those things have helped, but synchronizing or actually collapsing all those identities into one that can be managed from HR, provisioning, and deprovisioning all throughout the enterprise is actually the goal.
So So going back to where I was talking about how, I'm kind of old and did those Novell things. I mean, back then you didn't have as much of an identity sprawl because you essentially had everything on your premises there. You didn't have to worry about a bunch of weird apps. You just didn't have sprawl in general as much because it wasn't available for you. Maybe inside your network, but you did have different applications that would have different. A lot of them were in their databases, that thing. So you had PeopleSoft or something. Then you mentioned VPNs. When VPNs came around, I remember the first Shiva VPN I did back in the day before Intel bought them. That was the identity. All that was built in to the box itself. All the identities, the role-based access control, which they did have that, but it didn't connect anything to our Active Directory or anything like that. Our Novell directory, when I first put that in, we still had Novell. So it was strictly on its own. So that's kind of where you started seeing the sprawl started happening. And to your point, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you're saying in those 2010s, when you started seeing the onset of SaaS, software as a service, and it's all, even if the cloud wasn't as what it is today, you still have people putting stuff in their own data centers or whatever, and you would connect into that. That identity just started getting bigger. That's when you started seeing the advent of like CASBs and stuff starting to come around to try to get a hold of that. And it is super complicated to get all of that pulled back in once you've kind of, opened Pandora's box, right? All those identities are everywhere. Now getting them back in is what we're seeing in modern. And you mentioned compliance too. It's not just, it's regulatory compliance. You're starting to see things come down for critical infrastructure requirements from TSA and Homeland Security and things like that. That has to be, it's all around identity. That seems to be the first thing they've gone after, is the identity problem and the privilege escalation problem that you have with being able to get these identities and do things. So that's kind of that quick history lesson. We've let all this out. Now we're trying to get it back in, and we've got several, and I know we don't talk vendors much on here, but we got several vendors that we work with that are providing some of that to help. So the ones I can think about from an IGA perspective, like SailPoint, and then you've got CyberArk, Okta, all of those that are trying to create directories that you can get that down. So is that a good summation?
That is a great summation. I just want to take it forward a bit more,
Okay.
which is compliance. And really, you're talking about identities, managing identities and using MFA.
Mm-hmm.
So stemming from a SolarWinds event, third parties are now being audited too. And they're even small corporations now, LLCs, let's just say LLCs are now having to comply with a small set of rules, I think, today with regards to how they're managing identities and presenting to the vendor that, or the company they're doing services for. They're having to actually submit their answers and see if they comply or not comply. Because now third parties are another vector of attack, as we saw with SolarWinds.
Yeah, we've seen that with quite a few different. So Greg, from your perspective, I know you probably got a lot to say about this, but from the perspective of your day job, one thing that has occurred to me, and we talked about this earlier, when you get your identity situation, quote unquote, taken care of, let's say we've got it at Nirvana. You've only got one identity, and you've federated in as far as within your organization. And I know that's really hard to achieve, but you think about it, I know we're a smaller organization, but we've got the ability to, have single sign-on and MFA and all of that kind of wrapped up in how we've done things. You were a big part of implementing that here. I know in larger organizations, that's more difficult. But if you're going to go do an assessment in a big organization, we say it's good operationally and security-wise to have this locked down, but how does that affect you when you're looking, I've only got to worry about one identity now, and it's going to give me access into all these things. If you hit the right spot, you've got access to everything. Am I wrong?
That is kind of what I've been thinking about as we've been talking about this, is the double-edged sword of this. For years, I was an administrator before I did all this, and I had privileged accounts. So I have my regular account for my email and running around inside the network for applications. And then I had my privileged account that gave me higher levels of access. We had more controls around it that said, okay, well, you're a domain admin, you're an enterprise admin, you're going to have a 19-character password that's generated randomly every day. Okay, that's harder to get a hold of. And I think some parts of identity isn't so much a one-to-one map. It's kind of appropriate separations. And zero trust is trying to get as few credentials that are necessary and make sure that we are constantly authenticating and authorizing things to kind of get around this. But a single identity that has not only access to my email, but keys to the kingdom on another thing, I'm not sure that's the best of plans, because unless there's more behind it, it has to re-authenticate, revalidate, and there needs to be something smarter that says, is this behavior normal? And we are seeing that with some of the other tools of, why is this account that's never logged in popping, over here to this server that they've rarely touched or anything like that. For now, it seems like separation of privileges is still valid, but for most users, a single identity solves problems. It doesn't let them have 5 accounts within things and they're going to use the same or close to password that we're going to try and scrape up. It's if we get a fish through and someone clicks on it, then we're not getting that far, because it's not the super privileged accounts that should be checking their email. It's the other ones that give us that first vector. And the easier we make it on that 80-90% of an organization to manage and govern their access, the easier it's going to be to protect the other one that's harder.
So then I would say at that point, having a single identity can be problematic. However, if you're doing the other things, and this is to you, Leo, if you're doing the other things, like you're doing the constant change, you're monitoring the privilege escalation of that particular account, you've got vaulting set up where somebody can't just go grab a single username and password combination. You've got MFA. When you combine them both, you've got security and operational efficiency in both, and you can be pretty set.
Right. And it goes to the real world. I mean, what he's talking about is to the real world. You go to the airport, you're going to show your ID, your passport, and now you're showing a document that it's not easily hacked or copied. So you go to the bank and you got to show the same ID. You have to show proof. You have to show that you have that account.
Mm-hmm.
There are different situations. It's much like at the house. You open the door. Who's that? You see a face. You recognize it. You don't recognize it. So he's talking about that kind of logic that you build into your enterprise to detect when things are not right.
Okay. So how do you feel then in general, given at least the current options we have in technology these days, and combined with kind of, I think it's a decently exposed issue, and maybe not all around publicly, but I mean, we've been talking about username password combinations for a really long time. So you can go to talk to anybody in a grocery store parking lot and they'll tell you they know about username and password, at least anecdotally, or some level they get it. What's your general feeling when you combine how everybody is kind of a ubiquitous type of concept, username, password, and identity, combined with the current technology? Do you think we're in a really good spot? How much further do you think we have to go from a technology perspective to get some of that in place? Or are we really down to more like process and policies and stuff at this point?
I think technology helps. Now, I've seen some products that are doing zero trust in a smart way, and some that aren't. They just authenticate and get you going, and that's the last you hear about that authentication. You're good for forever, or a very long time. But there are other companies that are actually helping with the technology to keep prompting, to keep looking at the state of that device. Where is it? Is it moving? Is it constantly moving? Is it not moving? Is the user a traveler? Do you recognize this person working in multiple data centers at the same time.
Mhm.
Is that possible for that one person, or on the cloud or internet, pretty much? So identifying that is key to having the technology working right for you. Then you have processes and people and priorities,
Mhm.
because business leaders, CISOs, CIOs, they're going to prioritize on what is going to hurt them the most. Or and I would say, or I was going to say, or, but the low hanging fruits,
Mhm.
if they can achieve those, that's great. But they will prioritize on pretty much what's going to hurt them the most, or compliance. So a lot of them, I've seen over the years, they just try. I've seen leaders that just try to check boxes.
Yeah.
And checking boxes is great because they have to do it. However, going beyond that, thinking rationally, and looking at risks from the perspective of that other person across the table who's may be able to add something technically that may give that solution an edge. So,
Gotcha.
for example, you buy a solution and you just implement it as told by whoever helped you implement it. But now you're looking at this tool where you work, where you use it. Now you have to tailor that to you. It's like a suit you put on.
Yeah.
You have to wear it right. You're gonna take advantage of that tool. So I think it's process and technology. Going back to your point.
Gotcha. So, Greg, I know you haven't been focused on the offensive security for a really long time, but have you encountered an organization where you're doing some testing that has a technology like this decently put in place, and has it caused you a little bit of headache?
It does. We run into it more increasingly. Sometimes it's just an app. Sometimes it's across an enterprise. Um, the challenge, at least for I think there's two parts to it. One, from a pen testing perspective, it's challenging to approach an application that is or an environment that's been well guarded. Just logistically, we get authorization to test a application or test a network. But if everything runs through Okta, or if it runs through Microsoft's Azure, like Connect, I think is what they call it, you can't poke that too hard because we don't have authorization to test against Okta or Microsoft's infrastructure. Most of the clouds have a pretty friendly posture towards you don't have to clear everything, but you're also not going to get away with just brute forcing things. The system will lock you out faster because it's designed to stop that. So we have to adapt a little bit of we take it into account that, okay, well, your protection's here, so we're going to focus more on the logical errors of an application. We don't get all of the kind of easy wins that come from rolling your own authentication. We're not going to scrub a database to get into something. We're going to need credentials. So we have to go other ways, and that's where the tactics evolve over time of, if we can't get user credentials, or if we can't authenticate, what else can we do? How do we get a hold of credentials? And we're back to phishing, and we're back to password guessing and low and slow attacks, where we run a number of sprays and just hope we get lucky over time. And the stronger the environment, or the better the controls are in place, the harder it is for us to do our job. And that's a really, really good thing for an organization.
Yeah. Okay. Leo, any parting thoughts? I mean, I think we've covered this pretty well from a history perspective and how it affects, offensive security guys. Any last parts you want to talk about?
Yeah. So on the road to zero trust, I just want to summarize. Yeah, having a good identity and access management program, actually getting that life cycle of the identity in place, that goes from HR. Hopefully, enterprises are able to get everyone out from the IT departments out of the way, so that HR can procure, and they procure identities in true life cycle, that actually clears up identities that you may have that someone forgot to disable, as we saw with the colonial pipeline event. That's going to help corporations really get better secured. Achieving zero trust, I think every CIO and CISO, they're all trying to get there. It's just, how do they get there? How do they also have to put it in their budgets, but before they can get there, they have to have that good identity and access management program in place.
I agree with that. Yeah, I saw something the other day that somebody said we should not call it zero trust, but like as close to non-trust or something. It's like we'll never fully get there, right? But but identity access is definitely a core to that. All right.
Some people have said it's a panacea. It's like someday
the pie in the sky, the nirvana, whatever you want to call it. Maybe we'll get there. So, but at least we can get really, really close. And again, having strong IAM, IGA in place, not making it an IT problem, like you said, but more of a, let's just let this flow like it's supposed to flow from HR down. And then when they leave, it's back to HR, it's gone. If you tie all that together, it makes a lot of sense. You can get a pretty strong environment.
Yeah.
So. Well, Leo, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you coming out
Michael.
and joining us in the studio. Thanks for being here. Looking forward to the blog coming out. That should be here in probably a couple of weeks, I believe.
Yeah.
So looking forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Greg, any parting hacking thoughts?
I think zero trust is a good idea. Keep making my job harder, so I have to keep learning new things.
Hey, that's a good way of looking at it. If we got to attack from a different angle, you're learning something else. That's a good point.
Every day.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you for joining us, and thank you for being the new co-host. Looking forward to many, many, many of these sessions with you.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. This has been episode 44 of Set Solutions Ready, Set Secure podcast live stream. Thanks for joining us. We will see you on episode 45 in a couple of weeks. Talk to you later.